There we go. Excellent. And everybody sees the reading order?
Mhm.
Okay, and we all know what page we're on? In your edition? Do you know what page you're on in your edition?
No, Wordsworth.
Wordsworth is 300. Towards
Okay,
towards
thank
the
you.
bottom of the page. And one last thing, can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay, very
Perfect.
good. So for those who might be watching this on videotape later, today we are continuing with our reading of the Cyclops episode. And I will put the key phrase so you can look it up if you want to read along. Okay, off we go. Shove us over the drink, says I. Which is it? That's mine, says Joe, as the devil said to the dead policeman. And I belong to a race too, says Bloom, that is hated and persecuted. Also now, this very moment, this very instant, God, he nearly burnt his fingers with the butt of his old cigar. Robbed, says he, plundered, insulted, persecuted, taking what belongs to us by right. At this very moment, says he, putting up his fist, sold by auction off in Morocco like slaves or cattle. Are you talking about the New Jerusalem, says the citizen. I'm talking about injustice, says Bloom. Right, says John Wise. Stand up to it, then, with force like men. That's an almanac picture for you, marked for a soft-nosed bullet. Old Lardy face standing up to the business end of a gun. God, he'd adorn a sweeping brush, so he would, if he only had a nurse's apron on. And then he collapses all of a sudden, twisting around all the opposite, as limp as a wet rag. But it's no use, says he. Force, hatred, history, all that. That's not life for men and women, insulted and hated and hatred. And everybody knows that it's the very opposite of that that is really life. Next, please.
What, says Alf. Love, says Bloom. I mean, the opposite of hatred. I must go now, says he to John Wise, just round to the court a moment to see if Martin is there. If he comes, just say I'll be back in a second, just a moment. Who's hindering you? And off he pops like greased lightning. A new apostle to the Gentiles, says the citizen. Universal love. Well, says John Wise, isn't that what we're told? Love your neighbor. That chap, says the citizen. Beggar my neighbor is his motto. Love Moya. He's a nice pattern of a Romeo and Juliet. Love loves to love, love. Nurse loves the new chemist. Constable 14A loves Mary Kelly. Gertie McDowell loves the boy that has the bicycle. MB loves a fair gentleman. Li Chi Han, lovey up kissy cha poo chow. Jumbo the elephant loves Alice the elephant. Old Mr. Verschoyle with the ear trumpet loves old Mrs. Verschoyle with the turned-in eye. The man in the brown mackintosh loves a lady who is dead. His Majesty the King loves Her Majesty the Queen. Mrs. Norman W. Tupper loves Officer Taylor. You love a certain person, and this person loves that other person because everybody loves somebody, but God loves everybody. Well, Joe, says I, you're very good health and song. More power, citizen. Hurrah there, says Joe. The blessing of God and Mary and Patrick on you, says the citizen, and he ups with his pint to wet his whistle. We know these cantors, says he, preaching and picking your pocket. What about sanctimonious Cromwell and his Ironsides that put the women and children of Drogheda to the sword with the Bible next God is love pasted round the mouth of his cannon? The Bible. Did you read that skit in the United Irishman today about that Zulu chief that's visiting England? What's that, says Joe. Next, please.
So the citizen takes up one of his paraphernalia papers and he starts reading out. A delegation of the chief cotton magnates of Manchester was presented yesterday to His Majesty the Alaki of Abiakuta by Goldstick in waiting, Lord Wokup on eggs, to tender to His Majesty the heartfelt thanks of British traders for the facilities afforded them in his dominions. The delegation partook of luncheon, at the conclusion of which the dusky potentate, in the course of a happy speech, freely translated by the British chaplain, the Reverend Ananias Praise God Barebones, tendered his best thanks to Massa Wokup and emphasised the cordial relations existing between Abiakuta and the British Empire, stating that he treasured as one of his dearest possessions an illuminated Bible, the volume of the Word of God and the secret of England's greatness, graciously presented to him by the white chief woman, the great squaw Victoria, with a personal dedication from the august hand of the royal donor. The Alaki then drank a loving cup of first shot Ishkabah to the toast of black and white from the skull of his immediate predecessor in the dynasty Kakachakakak, surnamed 40 Warts, after which he visited the chief factory of Cottonopolis and signed his mark in the visitor's book, subsequently executing an old Abiakutic war dance in the course of which he swallowed several knives and forks amid hilarious applause from the girl hands. Next.
Widow woman, says Ned. I wouldn't doubt her. Wonder, did he put that Bible to the same use as I would? Same, only more so, says Lenehan. And thereafter, in that fruitful land, the broad-leaved mango flourished exceedingly. Is that by Griffith, says John Wise. No, says the citizen. It's not signed Shangya. It's only initial P. And a very good initial too, says Joe. That's how it's worked, says the citizen. Trade follows the flag. Well, says J.J., if they're any worse than those Belgians in the Congo Free State, they must be bad. Did you read that report by name? What's this? His name is Casement, says the citizen. He's an Irishman. Yes, that's the man. J.J. raping the women and girls and flogging the natives on the belly to squeeze all the red rubber they can out of them. I know where he's gone, says Lenehan, cracking his finger. Who, says I. Who, says he. The courthouse is a blind. He had a few bob on throwaway, and he's gone to gather in the shekels. Isn't that wide-eyed Kaffir, says the citizen, that never backed a horse in anger in his life? That's where he's gone, says Lenehan. I met Bantam Lyons going to back that horse, only I put him off it, and he told me Bloom gave him the tip. But bet what you like, he has 100 shillings to find on it. He's the only man in Dublin has it. A dark horse. He's a bloody dark horse himself, says Joe. Mind, Joe, says I. Show us the entrance out. There you are, says Terry. Goodbye, Ireland. I'm going to Gort. So I just went round the back of the yard to pump ship and be gone. 100 shillings to 5, while I was letting off my throwaway 22. Letting off my load gob, says I to myself. I knew he was uneasy in his 2 pints off of Joe and 1 in Slattery's off. It is mine to get off the mark 200 shillings is 5 quid. And when they were in the dark horse, Pisser Burke was telling me card party and letting on the child was sick. God, must have done about a gallon. Flabby Arsenal wife speaking down the tube. She's better, or she's ow. All the plans so we can vamoose with the pool if he won all. Jesus, full up as I was, trading without a license. Ow. Ireland, my nation, says he. Hoik. Never be up those bloody. There's the last of it. Jerusalem. Cuckoos. Next.
So anyway, when I got back, they were at it ding dong. John Wise saying it was Bloom gave the idea for Sinn Féin to Griffith to put in his papers all kind of gerrymandering, patch juries and swindling the taxes off the government, and appointing councils all over the world to walk about selling Irish industries, robbing Peter to pay Paul. Gob, that puts the bloody kibosh on it if old sloppy eyes is mucking up the show. Give us a bloody chance. God save Ireland from the likes of that bloody mouseabout. Mr. Bloom, with his Argyle Bargyle, and his old fella before him, perpetuating frauds, old Methuselah Bloom, the robbing bagman that poisoned himself with the prussic acid after he swamping the country with his baubles and his penny diamonds. Loans by post on easy terms, any amount of money advanced on note of land on hand. Distance no object, no security. Gob, he's like Lantry MacHale goat. He's like Lantry MacHale's goat that'll go a piece up the road with everyone. Well, it's a fact, says John Wise, and there's the man now that'll tell you all about it, Martin Cunningham. Sure enough, the castle car drove up with Martin on it and Jack Power with him, and a fella named Crofter or Crofton, pensioner out of the Collector General's, an Orangeman Blackburn does have on the registration, and he drawing his pay or crop for gallivanting around the country at the king's expense. Our travellers reached the rustic hostelry and alighted from their palfreys. "Oh, valet," cried he, who by his mien seemed the leader of the party, saucy knave to us. So saying, he knocked loudly with his sword hilt upon the open lattice. Mine host came forth at the summons, girding him with his tabard. "Give your good den, my master," said he with an obsequious bow. "Bestir thyself, sir," cried he who had knocked. "Look to our steeds, and for ourselves give us of our best, for in fate we need it." Next, please.
"Lack a day, good masters," said the host. "My poor house has but a bare larder. I know not what to offer your lordships." "How now, fellow?" cried the second of the party, a man of pleasant countenance. "So servest thou the king's messengers, Master Tapton?" An instantaneous change overspread the landlord's visage. "Cry you mercy, gentlemen," he said humbly. "And you be the king's messengers. God shield his majesty. You shall not want for aught. The king's friends, God bless his majesty, shall not go a-fasting in my house, I warrant me." "Then about," cried the traveller, who had not spoken, a lusty trencherman by his aspect, "has aught to give us?" Mine host bowed again as he made answer. "What say you, good masters, to a squab pigeon pasty, some collops of venison, a saddle of veal, widgeon with crisp hog's bacon, a boar's head with pistachios, a basin of jolly custard, a medlar tansy, and a flagon of old Rhenish?" "Gadzooks!" cried the last speaker. "That likes me well. Pistachios? Aha!" cried he of the pleasant countenance. "A poor house and a bare larder, quotha! 'Tis a merry rogue." So in comes Martin, asking where was Bloom. "Where is he?" says Lenihan. "Defrauding widows and orphans?" "Isn't that a fact?" says John Wise. "What I was telling the citizen about Bloom and the Sinn Féin." Next, please.
"That's so," says Martin, "or so they allege." "Who made those allegations?" says Alf. "Hey," says Joe, "I'm the alligator." "After all that," says John Wise, "why can't a Jew love his country like the next fellow?" "Why not?" says JJ, "when he's quite sure which country it is." "Is he a Jew or a Gentile or a Holy Roman or a swaddler? Or what the hell is he?" says Ned. "Or who is he? No offense, Crofton." "Who's Janus?" says JJ. "We don't want him," says Crofter, the Orange man or Presbyterian. "He's a perverted Jew," says Martin, "from a place in Hungary. And it was he drew up all the plans according to the Hungarian system. We know that in the castle." "Isn't he a cousin of Bloom the dentist?" says Jack Parr. "No, not at all. Only namesakes. His name was Varag, the father's name that poisoned himself. He changed it by deed poll. The father did." "That's the new Messiah for Ireland," says the citizen. "Ireland, island of saints and sages." Well, they're still waiting for their Redeemer, says Martin. For that matter, so are we. Yes, says JJ. And every male that's born, they think it may be their Messiah. And every Jew is in a tall state of excitement, I believe, till he knows if he's a father or a mother. Expecting every moment will be his next, says Lenehan. Oh, be God, says Ned. You should see Bloom before he was the son of his that died. I met him one day in the South City markets buying a tin of Neve's food 6 weeks before the wife was delivered. Entree, c'est mère, says JJ. You call that a man, says Citizen. I wonder if he'd ever put it out of sight, says Joe. Well, there are 2 children born anyhow, says Jack Parr. And who does he suspect, says the Citizen. Next.
Ah, there's many a true word spoken in jest. One of those mixed middlings he is. Lying up in the hotel, Pisser was telling me once a month with headache, like a toddy with her courses. Do you know what I'm telling you? It'd be an act of God to take a hold of that fellow, the like of that, and throw him in the bloody sea. Justifiable homicide. So it would. Then sloping off with his 5 quid without putting up a pint of stuff like a man? Give us your blessing. Not as much as would blind your eye. Charity to the neighbor, says Martin, but where is he? We can't wait. A wolf in sheep's clothing, says the Citizen. That's what he is. Virag from Hungary. Ahasuerus, I call him, cursed by God. Have you time for a brief libation, Martin, says Ned. Only one, says Martin. We must be quick. JJ and S. You, Jack, Crofton, 3 half-ones, Terry. St. Patrick would want to land again in Ballycillar and convert us, says the Citizen, after allowing things like that to contaminate our shores. Well, says Martin, rapping for his glass, God bless all here is my prayer. Amen, says the Citizen. And I'm sure he will, says Joe. Next, please.
Katrina, we skipped you. Do you want to read?
Yes, that's fine. Okay.
Oh, when did that happen? Sorry about that.
She just popped up. Where'd she come from?
No problem. Thank you. At the sound of this sacring bell, headed by a crucifer with acolytes, thurifers, boat bearers, readers, ostiari, deacons and subdeacons, the blessed company drew nigh of mitred abbots and priors, and guardians and monks and friars, the monks of Benedict of Spoleto, Carthusians and Camaldolisi, Cistercians and Olivetans, Oratorians and Vallambrosans, and the friars of Augustine, Brigatines, Premonstratensians, Servi Trinitarians, and the children of Peter Nolasco, and therewith from Carmel Mount the children of Elijah prophet, led by Albert Bishop and by Teresa of Avila, Calcid and others, and friars brown and gray, sons of poor Francis, Capuchins, Cordeliers, Mimimans, and observants, and the daughters of Clara, and the sons of Dominic, the friars, preachers, the sons of Vincent, and the monks of Saint Wulstan, and Ignatius, his children, and the confraternity of Christian brothers, led by the Reverend Brother Edmund Ignatius Rice. And after came all the saints and martyrs, virgins and confessors, Saint Cyr and Saint Isidora Arator, and Saint James the Less, and Saint Phocas of Sinope, and Saint Julian Hospitator, and Saint Felix de Cantalice, and Saint Simon Stylites, and Saint Stephen Protomartyr, and Saint John of God, and Saint Farrell, and Saint Lugard, and Saint Theodotus, and Saint Volmar, and Saint Richard, and Saint Vincent, Saint de Paul, and Saint Martin of Todi, and Saint Martin of Tours, and Saint Alfred, and Saint Joseph, and Saint Denis, and Saint Cornelius, and Saint Leopold, and Saint Thomas, and Saint Terence, and Saint Edward, and Saint Owen Caniculus, and Saint Anonymous, and Saint Eponymous, and Saint Synonymous, and Saint Homonymus, and Saint Peronimus, and Saint Synonymous, and Saint Lawrence O'Toole, and Saint James of Dingle, and Compostela, and Saint Commercial, and Saint Columba, and Saint Celestine, and Saint Coleman, and Saint Kevin, and Saint Brendan. And next, please.
And Saint Frigidian, and Saint Sinan, and Saint Facina, and Saint Columbanus, and Saint Gall, and Saint Fursy, and Saint Fintan, and Saint Fiacre, and Saint John Nepomuc, and Saint Thomas Aquinas, and Saint Ives of Brittany, and Saint Michan, and Saint Herman Joseph, and the three patrons of holy youth, Saint Aloysius Gonzaga, and Saint Stanislaus Kostka, and Saint John Birchmans, and the saints Gervasius, Servasius, and Bonifacius, and Saint Breege, and Saint Kieran, and Saint Canice of Kilkenny, and Saint Jarlath of Tuam, and Saint Finbar, and Saint Pepin of Ballymun, and Brother Aloysius Pacificus, and Brother Louis Bellocosus, and Saints Rose of Lima and of Viterbo, and Saint Martha of Bethany, and Saint Mary of Egypt, and Saint Lucy, and Saint Bridget, and Saint Attracta, and Saint Dimpna, and Saint Ida, and Saint Marian Calpensis, and the Blessed Sister Teresa of the Child Jesus, and Saint Barbara, and Saint Scholastica, and Saint Ursula, with 11,000 virgins. And all came with nimbi and aureoles and gloriae, bearing palms and harps and swords and olive crowns, in robes whereon were woven the blessed symbols of their efficacies: inkhorn, arrows, loaves, cruces, fetters, axes, trees, bridges, babes in a bathtub, shells, wallets, shears, keys, dragons, lilies, buckshot, beards, hogs, lamps, bellows, beehives, soup ladles, stars, snakes, anvils, boxes of Vaseline, bells, crutches, forceps, stags' horns, watertight boots, hawks, millstones, eyes on a dish, wax candles, aspergills, unicorns, and as they wended their way by Nelson's Pillar, Henry Street, Mary Street, Capel Street, Little Britain Street, chanting the introit in Epiphania Domini, which beginneth Surge Illuminare, and thereafter most sweetly the gradual Omnes, which saith De Saba Venient. They did diverse wonders, such as casting out devils, raising the dead to life, multiplying fishes, healing the halt and the blind, discovering various articles which had been mislaid, interpreting and fulfilling the scriptures, blessing and prophesying. And last, beneath a canopy of cloth of gold, came the Reverend Father O'Flynn, attended by Malachi and Patrick. And when the good fathers had reached the appointed place, the house of Bernard Kiernan and Co., Limited, 8, 9, and 10 Little Britain Street, wholesale grocers, wine and brandy shippers, licensed for the sale of beer, wine, and spirits for consumption on the premises, the celebrant blessed the house and censed the mullioned windows and the groins and the vaults and the arrises and the capitals and the pediments and the cornices and the engrailed arches and the spires and the cupolas, and sprinkled the lintels thereof with blessed water, and prayed that God might bless that house as he had blessed the house of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and make the angels of his light to inhabit therein. And entering, he blessed the viands and the beverages, and the company of all the blessed answered his prayers. Adiutorum nostrum in nomine Domini, qui decit velum in caelum in terram, Dominus vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo. And he laid his hands upon the blessed and gave thanks, and he prayed, and they all with him prayed. Deus cust verbo sanctificator omnia, benedictionem tuam, effunde super creataris listas, et presta ut quisquis est secundum legem et voluntatem, tuum cum gratiarum actione usus fuerit per invocationem sanctissimi nominis tui corporis sanctimen et anime tutuam te actore precipiat per Christum Dominum nostrum. And so say all of us, says Jack. Next.
1,000 a year, Lambert says Crofton. Sorry, 1,000 a year, Lambert says Crofton or Crawford. Right, says Ned, taking up his John Jameson. And butter for fish. I was just looking around to see what the happy thought would strike when be damned. But in he comes again, letting on to be in a hell of a hurry. I was just round to the courthouse, says he, looking for you. I hope I'm not. No, says Martin, we're ready. Courthouse, my eye, and your pockets hanging down with gold and silver. Mean bloody scut. Stand as a drink itself. Devil a sweet fear. There's a Jew for you. All for number one. Cute as a shithouse rat. 100 to 5. Don't tell anyone, says the citizen. Beg your pardon, says he. Come on, boys, says Martin, seeing it was looking blue. Come along now. Don't tell anyone, says the citizen, letting a bawl out of him. It's a secret. And the bloody dog woke up and let a growl. Bye-bye all, says Martin. And he got them out as quick as he could. Jack Power and Crofton, or whatever you call him, and him in the middle of them, letting on to be all at sea with them on the bloody jaunting car. Off with you, says Martin to the Jarvey. The milk-white dolphin tossed his mane, and rising in the golden poop, the helmsman spread the bellying sail upon the wind, and stood off forward with the whole sail set, the spinnaker to larboard. And many comely nymphs drew nigh to starboard and to larboard, and clinging to the sides of the noble bark, they linked their shining forms, as doth the cunning wheelwright when he fashions about the heart of his wheel the equidistant rays, whereof each one is sister to another, and he binds them all with an outer ring, and giveth speed to the feet of men, when as they ride to a hosting or contend for the smile of ladies fair. Even so did they come and set them, those willing nymphs, the undying sisters, and they laughed, sporting in a circle of their foam, and the bark clave the waves. But begob, I was just lowering the heel of the pint when I saw the citizen getting up to waddle to the door, puffing and blowing with the dropsy, and he cursing the curse of Cromwell on him, bell, book and candle in Irish, spitting and spatting out of him, and Joe and little Alf round him like a leprechaun trying to pacify him. Let me alone, says he, and begob, he got as far as the door, and they holding him, and he bawls out of him, 3 cheers for Israel. Next.
Sit down on the parliamentary side of your ass for Christ's sake, and don't be making a public exhibition of yourself. Jesus, there's always some bloody clown or other kicking up a bloody murder about bloody nothing. God, I turned the porter sour. It'd turn the porter sour in your gut, so it would. And all the ragamuffins and sluts of the nation round the door, and Martin telling the Jarvey to drive ahead, and the citizen bawling, and Alf and Joe Adam to wished. And he on his high horse about the Jews and the loafers calling for a speech, and Jack Power trying to get him to sit down on the car and hold his bloody jaw, and a loafer with a patch over his eye starts singing, if a man in the moon was a Jew, Jew, Jew. And Slut shouts at him, hey, mister, your flyer's open, mister. And he says, Mendelssohn was a Jew, and Karl Marx, and Mercadante, and Spinoza. And the Savior was a Jew, and his father was a Jew, your God. He had no father, said Martin. That'll do now, drive ahead. Who's God, says the citizen. Well, his uncle was a Jew, says he. Your God was a Jew. Christ was a Jew like me. God, the citizen made a plunge into the shop. By Jesus, he says, I'll braid that bloody Jew man for using the holy name. By Jesus, I'll crucify him, so I will. Give us that biscuit box here. Stop, stop, says Joe. A large and appreciative gathering of friends and acquaintances from the metropolis and Greater Dublin assembled in their thousands to bid farewell to Nagasagas Urim Nipoti Virag, late of Messrs. Alexander Thoms, printers to His Majesty, On the occasion of his departure for the distant clime of Sazaharmacharjadala, meadow of the murmuring waters. Ceremony, which went off with great eclat, was characterized by the most affecting cordiality. An illuminated scroll of ancient Irish vellum, the work of Irish artists, was presented to the distinguished phenomenologist on behalf of a large section of the community and was accompanied by the gift of a silver casket, tastefully executed in the style of ancient Celtic ornament, a work which reflects every credit on the makers. This is Jacob Ago Jacob. The departing guest was the recipient of a hearty ovation, many of those who were present being visibly moved when the select orchestra of Irish pipes struck up the well-known strains of Come Back to Erin, followed by Wyszynski's March. Tar barrels and bonfires were lighted along the coastline of the Four Seas, on the summits of the Hill of Howth, Three Rock Mountain, Sugarloaf, Brayhead, the mountains of Mourne, the Galtees, the Ox and Donegal and Sperrin Peaks, the Nagels and the Bographs, Connemara Hills, the reeks of McGillicuddy, Slave Aughty, Slave Berna, and Slave Lagoon. Amid cheers that rent the welkin, responded to by answering cheers from a big muster of henchmen on the distant Cambrian and Caledonian hills, the mastodontic pleasure ship slowly moved away, saluted by a final floral tribute from the representatives of the fair sex, who were present in large numbers, while, as it proceeded down the river, escorted by a flotilla of barges, the flags of the ballast office and custom house were dipped in salute, as were also those of the electrical power station at the Pigeon House and the Poolbeg Light. Vision gone but not forgotten. Next.
Yeah, dear. God, the devil wouldn't stop him till he got hold of the bloody tin anyhow. And out with him a little elf hanging onto his elbow, and he shouting like a struck pig, as good as any bloody play in the Queen's Royal Theatre. Where is he till I'll murder him? And Ned and JG paralysed with the laughing. Bloody wars, says I. I'll be in for the last gospel. But as luck would have it, the Jarvey got the nag's head round the other way and off with him. Hold on, citizen, says Joe, stop. Begod, he drew his hand and made a swipe and let fly. Mercy of God, the sun was in his eyes, or he'd have left him for dead. Gob, he nearly sent it into the County Longford. The bloody nag took fright, and the old mongrel after the car like bloody hell, and all the poplins shouting and laughing, and the old tin box clattering along the street. The catastrophe was terrific and instantaneous in its effort. The observatory of Dunsink registered all 11 shocks, all of the 5th grade of Mercalli's scale, and there is no record extant of a similar seismic disturbance in our Ireland since the earthquake of 1534, the year of the rebellion of Silken Thomas. The epicenter appears to have been that part of the metropolis which constitutes the Inns Quay ward and parish of St. Michan, covering a surface of 41 acres, 2 roofs and 1 square pole or perch. All the lordly residencies in the vicinity of the Palace of Justice were demolished, and that noble edifice itself, in which at the time of the catastrophe important legal debates were in progress, is literally a mass of ruins, beneath which it is to be feared all the occupants have been buried alive. From the reports of eyewitnesses, it transpires that the seismic waves were accompanied by a violent atmospheric perturbation of cyclonic character. An article of headgear since asserted to belong to the much respected Clerk of the Crown and Peace, Mr. George Fortrell, and a silk umbrella with gold handle with the engraved initials, coat of arms, and house number of the reduced and worshipful chairman of quarter sessions, Sir Frederick Faulkner, Recorder of Dublin, have been discovered by search parties in remote parts of the island, respectively. The former on the 3rd basalt ridge of the Giant's Causeway, the latter embedded to the extent of 1 foot 3 inches in the sandy beach of Hollyopen Bay near the old head of Kinsale. Next, please.
Other eyewitnesses deposed that they observed an incandescent object of enormous proportions hurtling through the atmosphere at a terrifying velocity in a trajectory directed southwest by west. Messages of condolence and sympathy are being hourly received from all parts of the different continents, and the sovereign pontiff has been graciously pleased to decree that a special Missa pro defunctus shall be celebrated simultaneously by the ordinaries of each and every cathedral church of all the episcopal dioceses subject to the spiritual authority of the Holy See in suffrage of the souls of those faithful departed who have been so unexpectedly called away from our midst. The work of salvage, removal of debris, human remains, etc., has been entrusted to Messrs. Michael Mead and Son, 159 Great Brunswick Street, and Messrs. T.C. Martin, 77, 78, 79, and 80 North Wall, assisted by the men and officers of the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry under the general supervision of H.R.H. Rear Admiral, the Right Honourable Sir Hercules Hannibal Habeas Corpus Anderson, KGKP, KT, PC, KCB, MP, JP, MB, DSO, SOD, MFH, MORIA, BL, MUSDOC, PLG, FTCD, FORUI, FORCPI, and FORCSI. Next, please.
You never saw the like of it in all your born puff. God, if he got that lottery ticket on the side of his pole, he'd remember the Gold Cup. He would so. But begob the citizen would have been lagged for assault and battery, and Joe for aiding and abetting. The Jardy saved his life by furious driving, as sure as God made Moses. What? Oh, Jesus, he did. And he let a volley of oaths after him. Did he kill him? He says, or what? And he's shouting to the bloody dog, after him, Gary, after him, boy. And the last we saw was the bloody car rounding the corner and the old sheep face on it, gesticulating, and the bloody mongrel after it with his lugs back for all he was bloody well worth to tear him limb from limb. 100-5. Jesus, he took the value of it out of him, I promise you. When, lo, there came about them all a great brightness, and they beheld the chariot within. He stood, ascend to heaven, and they beheld him in the chariot, clothed in the glory of brightness, having the raiment of the sea, fair as the moon, and terrible for awe, they durst not look at him. And then came a voice out of heaven calling, Elijah, Elijah. And he answered with a main cry, Abba, Adonai. And they beheld him, even him, Ben Bloom, Elijah, amid the clouds of angels ascend to glory of the brightness at an angle of 45 degrees over Donahue's and Little Great Green Street, like a shot of a shovel. Wow. What was all that about?
It's wonderful. It's outrageous. Out Rabelaising Rabelais.
They lost the plot here and there.
It's just the wonderful exaggerating that us human beings tend to do.
I know.
Ah,
Even the dog had a part.
yeah.
Gary,
Uh,
And our Bloom is like a god in the end.
What? What the ascension or the transfiguration? I don't know which.
He stood ascend to heaven.
You know,
That's wonderful.
I read a thing recently that absolutely floored me. And someone had put a map up of the area of the 40 years in the desert. And
Oh,
it really kind of exploded my mind, because that whole space where supposedly they spent 40 years wandering in the desert, it's like a short afternoon's drive. It's really not far at all. And you know, it's kind of like this, where you just exaggerate till it's in some metaphysical comedic realm. Anyway, I had a good time and I laughed a lot throughout all of this. Shall we go on to the next?
You have to remember, Duncan, that men were in charge and they would not ask for directions.
There you go.
very true, but
Well, here we go on now to the
It's interesting, in just in theological terms, Elijah, who Bloom is supposed to be, or is connected to in the end, he's one of the only humans who were ever assumed into heaven bodily. He was taken up into heaven by God bodily. So I think there's Elijah, there's the Blessed Virgin, and there's Jesus. I don't think there's any others, but there might be.
And now we can add Bloom.
And now we can add Bloom. And Elijah, we're coming up on Passover pretty soon. Well, I mean, not Passover.
Not Passover.
No, it's
Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I'm sorry. But Passover, you always leave a seat for Elijah, because you never know when he's going to return. He's expected to return, just like Jesus or the Messiah, or maybe Bloom. Anyway,
It's one. It's
now for Gertie McDowell.
Oh, good.
I just want to ask a question. Remember before we were talking about what the dad had done that he killed himself?
yeah.
And it says that baubles and penny diamonds and loans by post on easy terms. So was he a money lender?
Among other
I was
things,
wondering the same thing, Orla, yeah.
among other things, I think so. If you can trust the narrator, I don't know.
Yeah, right.
But why that would have led him to commit suicide is another story. Unless he was heavily in debt himself. I think it's the fact that his wife had died and he was alone more than any other reason, but that's just speculation. It's all just speculation.
Yeah.
But at least that's in the minds of some of the Dublin citizens, that he's a money lender.
Right.
I loved all the saints and the boxes of Vaseline and the babes in the bathtubs in amongst them all. It was just.
Yeah, Umberto Eco, who wrote a little book on Ulysses, and he says that this whole thing, all these long lists, that this was a medieval rhetorical device to convince the reader that the writer was covering everything and had vast knowledge of everything. That's what all these long lists are about, is to overwhelm the reader with the writer's erudition and knowledge. So he says.
Wonderful.
All right. Katrina, I guess we're ready to launch into Gertie McDowell.
Okay. The summer evening had begun to fold the world in its mysterious embrace. Far away in the west, the sun was setting, and the last glow of all too fleeting day lingered lovingly on sea and strand, on the proud promontory of dear old Howth, guarding as ever the waters of the bay, on the weed-grown rocks along Sandy Mount shore, and last but not least, on the quiet church whence there streamed forth at times upon the stillness the voice of prayer to her who is in her pure radiance a beacon ever to the storm-tossed heart of man, Mary, star of the sea. The three girlfriends were seated on the rocks, enjoying the evening scene and the air, which was fresh but not too chilly. Many a time and oft were they wont to come there to that favorite nook to have a cozy chat beside the sparkling waves and discuss matters feminine. Sissy Caffrey and Edie Boardman with the baby in the pushcart, and Tommy and Jackie Caffrey, two little curly-headed boys dressed in sailor suits with caps to match, and the name HMS Belle Isle printed on both. For Tommy and Jackie Caffrey were twins, scarce 4 years old, and very noisy and spoiled twins sometimes, but for all that, darling little fellows who had bright, merry faces and endearing ways about them. They were dabbling in the sand with their spades and buckets, building castles as children do, or playing with their big colored ball, happy as the day was long. And Edie Boardman was rocking the chubby baby to and fro in the pushcart, while that young gentleman fairly chuckled with delight. He was but 11 months and 9 days old, and though still a tiny toddler, was just beginning to lisp his first babyish words. Sissy Caffrey bent over to him to tease his fat little plucks and the dainty dimple in his chin. Next, please.
Now, baby, Sissy Caffrey said, say out big, big. I want a drink of water. And the baby prattled after him. A jaboo. Sissy Caffrey cuddled the wee chap, for she was awfully fond of children, so patient with little sufferers, and Tommy Caffrey would never be got to take his castor oil unless it was Sissy Caffrey that held his nose and promised him the skaty heel of the loaf of brown bread with golden syrup on it. What a persuasive power that girl had. But to be sure, baby was as good as gold, a perfect little dote in his fancy bib. None of your spoilt beauties. Flora McFlimsy sort was Sissy Caffrey, a true-hearted lass. A truer-hearted lass never drew the breath of life, always with a laugh in her gypsy-like eyes and a frolicsome word on her cherry-ripe red lips, a girl lovable to the extreme. And Edie Boardman laughed too at the quaint language of little brother. And just then, there was a slight altercation between Master Tommy and Master Jackie. Boys will be boys, and our two twins were no exception to this golden rule. The apple of discord was a certain castle of sand which Master Jackie had built, and Master Tommy would have it right go wrong that it was to be architecturally improved by a front door, like the Martello Tower had. But if Master Tommy was headstrong, Master Jackie was self-willed too, and true to the maxim that every little Irishman's house is his castle, he fell upon his hated rival, and to such a purpose that the would-be assailant came to grief, and alas, to relate the coveted castle too. Needless to say, the cries of the discomfited Master Tommy drew the attention of the girlfriends. Next.
Come here, Tommy, his sister called imperatively, at once. And you, Jackie, for shame to throw poor Tommy in the dirty sand. Wait till I catch you for that. His eyes misty with unshed tears, Master Tommy came at her call, for their big sister's word was law with the twins, and in a sad plight he was after his misadventure. His little man-o'-war top and unmentionables were full of sand, but Sissy was a past mistress in the art of smoothing over life's tiny troubles, and very quickly, not one speck of sand was to be seen on his smart little suit. Still, the blue eyes were glistening with hot tears that would well up So she kissed away the hurtness and shook her hand at Master Jackie, the culprit, and said if she was near him, he wouldn't be far from him, her eyes dancing in admonition. Nasty bold Jackie, she cried. She put an arm round the little mariner and coaxed winningly, what's your name? Butter and Cream? Tell us who is your sweetheart, spoke Edie Birdman. Is Sissy your sweetheart? No, tearful Tommy said. Is Edie Boardman your sweetheart? Sissy queried. No, Tommy said. I know, Edie Boardman said, none too amiably, with an arch glance from her short-sighted eyes. I know who is Tommy's sweetheart. Gertie is Tommy's sweetheart. No, Tommy said on the verge of tears. Sissy's quick mother wit guessed what was amiss, and she whispered to Edie Boardman to take him there behind the pushcart where the gentleman couldn't see, and to mind he didn't wet his new tan shoes. Next, please.
But who was Gertie? Gertie MacDowell, who was seated near her companions, lost in thought, gazing far away into the distance, was in truth a fair specimen of winsome Irish girlhood as one could wish to see. She was pronounced beautiful by all who knew her, though, as folks often said, she was more a Giltrap than a MacDowell. Her figure was slight and graceful, inclining even to fragility, but those iron jelloids she had been taking of late had done her a world of good, much better than the widow Welch's female pills, and she was much better of those discharges she used to get, and that tired feeling. The waxen pallor of her face was almost spiritual in its ivory-like purity, though her rosebud mouth was a genuine Cupid's bow, Greekly perfect. Her hands were of finely veined alabaster with tapering fingers, and as white as lemon juice and queen of ointments could make them, though it was not true that she used to wear kid gloves in bed or take a milk foot bath either. Bertha Supple once told that once to Edie Boardman, a deliberate lie, when she was black out at daggers drawn with Gertie. The girl chums had, of course, their little tiffs from time to time, like the rest of mortals. And she told her not let on whatever she did, that it was her that told her, or she'd never speak to her again. No, honour where honour is due. There was an innate refinement, a languid, queenly hauteur about Gertie, which was unmistakably evident in her delicate hands and high-arched instep. Had kind fate but willed her to be born a gentlewoman of high degree in her own right, and had she only received the benefit of a good education, Gertie MacDowell might easily have held her own beside any lady in the land, and have seen herself exquisitely gowned with jewels on her brow and patrician suitors at her feet, vying with one another to pay their devoirs to her. Next.
Mayhap it was this, the love that might have been, that lent to her softly featured face at whiles a look, tense with suppressed meaning, that imparted a strange yearning tendency to the beautiful eyes, a charm few could resist. Why have women such eyes of witchery? Gertie's were the bluest Irish blue, set off by lustrous lashes and dark, expressive brows. Time was when those brows were not so silkily seductive. It was Madame Vera Verity, the directress of the Woman Beautiful page of the Princess novelette, who had first advised her to try eyebrow lace, which gave that haunting expression to the eyes so becoming in leaders of fashion, and she had never regretted it. And there was blushing scientifically cured, and how to be tall, increase your height, and you have a beautiful face, but your nose. That would suit Mrs. Dignam because she had a button one. But Gertie's crowning glory was her wealth of wonderful hair. It was dark brown with a natural wave in it. She had cut it that very morning on account of new moon, and it nestled about her pretty head in a profusion of luxuriant clusters, and pared her nails too. Thursday for wealth. And just now at Edie's words, as a telltale flush, delicate at the faintest rose bloom, crept into her cheeks, she looked so lovely in her sweet girlish shyness that of a surety God's fair land of Ireland did not hold her equal. Next.
For an instant, she was silent with rather sad, downcast eyes. She was about to retort, but something checked the words on her tongue. Inclination prompted her to speak out. Dignity told her to be silent. The pretty lips pouted a while, but then she glanced up and broke out into a joyous little laugh, which had it all the freshness of a young May morning. She knew right well, no one better, what made Squinty Edie say that because of him pooling in his attention, when it was simply a lover's quarrel. As per usual, somebody's nose was out of joint about the boy that had the bicycle, always riding up and down in front of her window. Only now his father kept him in the evenings, studying hard to get an next week in the intermediate that was on. And he was going to Trinity College to study for a doctor when he left the high school, like his brother W. Wiley, who was racing in the bicycle race in Trinity College University. Little recked he perhaps for what she felt, that dull aching void in her heart sometimes, piercing to the core. Yet he was young, and perchance he might learn to love her in time. There were Protestants in his family, and of course Gertie knew who came first, and after him, the Blessed Virgin, and then St. Joseph. But he was undeniably handsome, with an exquisite nose, and he was what he looked, every inch a gentleman. The shape of his head, too, at the back without his cap on, that she would know anywhere, something off the common, and the way he turned the bicycle at the lamp with his hands off the bars, and also the nice perfume of those good cigarettes. And besides, they were both of his size. And that was why Edie Boardman thought she was so frightfully clever, because he didn't go and ride up and down in front of her bit of a garden. Next, please.
Bertie was dressed simply, but with the instinctive taste of a votary of Dame Fashion, for she felt that there was just a mite that he might be out. A neat blouse of electric blue, self-tinted by Dolly dyes, because it was expected in the ladies' pictorial that electric blue would be worn, with a smart V opening down to the division and kerchief pocket, in which she always kept a piece of cotton wool scented with her favourite perfume, because the handkerchief spoiled the sit, and a navy three-quarter skirt cut to the stride showed off her slim, graceful figure to perfection. She wore a coquettish little love of a hat with wide-leaved nigger straw contrast, trimmed with an underbrim of egg blue chenille, and at the side a butterfly bow to tone. All Tuesday week afternoon she was hunting to match that chenille, but at last she found what she wanted at Cleary's summer sales. The very it. Slightly shop-soiled, but you would never notice. 7 fingers, 2 and a penny. She did it up all by herself, and what joy was hers when she tried it on then, smiling at the lovely reflection which the mirror gave back to her. And when she put it on the water jug to keep the shape, she knew that that would take the shine out of some people she knew. Her shoes were the newest thing in footwear. Edie Boardman prided herself that she was very petite, but she never had a foot like Gertie MacDowell, a 5 and never would ash, oak, or elm. Next, please.
With patent toe caps and just one smart buckle over her high-arched instep. Her well-turned ankle displayed in perfect proportions beneath her skirt, and just the proper amount and no more of her shapely limbs encased in fine spun hose with high spliced heels and wide garter tops. As for undies, they were Gertie's chief care, and who that knows the fluttering hopes and fears of sweet 17? Though Gertie would never see 17 again, and find it in his heart to blame her, She had 4 dinky sets with awfully pretty stitchery, 3 garments and nighties extra, and each slotted with different coloured ribbons: rose pink, pale blue, mauve, and pea green. And she aired them herself and blued them when they came home from the wash, and ironed them. And she had a brickbat to keep the iron on, because she wouldn't trust those washerwomen as far as she'd see them scorching the thing. She was wearing the blue for luck, hoping against hope, her own colour, and lucky too for a bride to have a bit of blue somewhere on her, because the green she wore that day brought grief, because her father brought him into, because his father brought him in to study for the intermediate exhibition, and because she thought perhaps he might be out, because she was dressing that morning. She nearly slipped up the old pair on her inside out, and that was for luck and lovers meeting. If you put those things on inside out, or if they get untied, that he was thinking about you, so long as it wasn't a Friday. Next.
And yet, that strained look on her face, a gnawing sorrow is there all the time. Her very soul is in her eyes, and she would give worlds to be in the privacy of her own familiar chamber, where, giving way to tears, she could have a good cry and relieve her pent-up feelings, though not too much, because she knew how to cry nicely before the mirror. "You are lovely, Gertie," it said. The paly light of evening falls upon a face infinitely sad and wistful. Gertie McDowell yearns in vain. Yes, she had known from the very first that her daydream of a marriage had been arranged, and the wedding bells ringing for Mrs. Reggie Wiley, TCD, because the one who had married the elder brother would be Mrs. Wiley, and the fashionable intelligence of Mrs. Gertrude Wiley was wearing a sumptuous confection of gray trimmed with expensive blue fox, was not to be. He was too young to understand. He would not believe in love, a woman's birthright. That night of the party long ago in Stores, he was still in short trousers. When they were alone and he stole an arm around her waist, she went white to the very lips. He called her little one in a strangely husky voice, and snatched half a kiss, the first, but it was only the end of her nose. And then he hastened from the room with a remark about refreshments. Impetuous fellow, strength of character had never been Reggie Wiley's strong point, and he who would woo and win Gertie McDowell must be a man among men. But waiting, always waiting to be asked, and it was leap year too, and would soon be over. No Prince Charming is her beau ideal to lay a rare and wondrous love at her feet, but rather a manly man with a strong, quiet face who had not found his ideal, perhaps his hair slightly flecked with gray, and who would understand, taking her in his sheltering arms, strain her to him in all the strength of his deep, passionate nature, and comfort her with a long, long kiss. It would be like heaven. For such a one, she yearns this balmy summer eve, with all the heart of her that she longs to be his only, his affianced bride, for rich or for poor, in sickness, in health, till death us two part, from this day forward. From this day to the day forward. Next, please.
Can't hear you.
He's floundering. Okay. I think this is a good place to stop. It's approaching 10 after the hour. And I think that we read just enough of this to get a nice contrast with the ending of the last chapter. And I think that, at least to me, that the contrast between the two forms of exaggeration, and maybe I can be bold enough to say, contrasting the masculine form of exaggeration with the feminine form of exaggeration. And both, at least to me, you know, these are fantasy worlds that people build up to deal with the everydayness of life. So, can I get page numbers?
Gobbler is 289.
289, okay.
The same for Bodley Head.
Okay, repeat that number again, please.
289.
289, okay, and I've got Wordsworth here.
318.
318, okay. Any others that I need to be aware of?
I think
Okay.
Emily
Hey,
gave Wordsworth. Mhm,
Yeah,
thank you.
Emily has Wordsworth. and
Okay, Penguin, the long one is 457.
Penguin long 457.
57.
Okay, and the next time we will read will be, I believe, the 31st.
Mhm.
All right. Wonderful.
It's hilarious.
Yeah, it's outrageous. It's kind of I of course, every time we enter a new chapter, I almost always say that this is, you know, one of the greatest chapters. But I particularly like the Gertie McDowell chapter because to me it's like the perfect analysis of consumerism and the effectiveness of advertising and capturing people's minds and putting them in a particular way of looking at the world.
Mm. Yeah, just love it.
When I was in Spain during the summer, and I used to be just sitting by the water, there was a family came every day, and there was two little boys, and I nicknamed the Caffreys because because guaranteed I used to set my watch to see when the fight would start, you know, and they'd start, and they did the sandcastle and they did the ball, and I used to be, oh Jesus, here's Jackie and Tommy Caffrey coming. Oh, if they only knew. And they were small little things. There was probably maybe a year between them. Guaranteed there was a big fight. There was tears, and Daddy was trying to console him, and Mammy was consoling him. It was so funny.
Yep.
Just to keep me entertained.
We had 3 children, and when they were young, they were all born within 5 years. So they were pretty close to each other. And they were pretty lively kids. And a few times when we would go places, someone would turn and they'd say, "There's only 3? I thought there were a lot more."
Hilarious.
I've got to go. I'm sorry, but thank you all. See you next week.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
See you, Katrina.
Bye.
No, but you know, I've been in shops, you know, when there's that child who's screaming and the poor parents are trying to, you know, pacify it. I always say to them, I was that child. My mother said I never shut up. So just the parents sort of stop, and even the child sort of stops to see here, you know, because it's really embarrassing.
Yeah, but yeah, right. When a child is going ballistic, to suddenly get the any kind of attention from a stranger tends to have a sobering effect. Not always, but tends to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he has it, Joyce has it just down to perfectly how Gertie is thinking, how the girls interact. It's just
Mm.
amazing.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
And I
it's over 100 years, he's writing
Yeah.
over 100 years ago, and it's just so, and that cattiness and all of that. He's
Yeah,
just,
it's how he got a woman. So
yeah,
what goes
Yeah.
on in a girl's head, and how he gets different women and different personalities in each of them. And
Mhm.
part of the time you think, well, he's like Bloom, he's been reading Molly's books, so he's getting but he's been reading everything. He's been reading everything.
Yeah. I think he read a lot of women's magazines, but it's still extremely interesting because as poor as the family was, um, I don't think he could have gotten all that intimate knowledge from his sisters, because they didn't have the sort of funds to do that. So it's a very interesting thing to speculate about. How did he learn that? How did he learn the fashion? I
it
mean,
must,
his
must
understanding of fashion and all that. Mhm.
I assume there were women's
Sure.
magazines and women's columns for fashion somewhere in the newspapers, I would think. A column written by an imaginary woman. It might even be a man writing as Lady
Right.
So and so kind of thing, talking about the latest fashions or reviewing the tea that happened at the Shelburne Hotel. And this is what the ladies were wearing. And that might have been newsworthy. So maybe he was getting it that way.
Mhm.
but Nora must have had some sort of, contribution, like I don't know, I get the impression that she liked clothes and everything.
Yeah, I think when they had money, of course, it was either feast or famine. So it seems it was either feast or famine than the James and Nora Joyce house.
Hmm.
And they apparently had no problem spending money when they had it. But nevertheless, the degree of knowledge is pretty astounding.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Well, it's not just the knowledge, it's the interest that he would be interested enough in this topic to become that knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Yep. I was also interested that very early in this chapter that actually Gertie McDowell's feet come up. And of course, well, and that comes up very early. But so a first reader, Lois, you've read this chapter before.
Yes,
Okay, so you know about
I know what's
Gertie.
going to happen.
Well, you know what's going to happen, and you also know that Gertie is lame.
Yeah, that's what I thought, and I couldn't remember if that was right.
Yeah, that's right. But nevertheless, when she's sitting there, I believe that he has her thoughts thinking about her lovely feet and how nice and petite and beautiful they are compared to like Sissy Caffrey's feet.
Hmm.
So for a first reader who's paying any attention at all, or maybe subliminals enough to get this impression about how beautiful Gertie McDowell's feet are, and then finding out at the end, like Bloom does, because Bloom has this image of it. Well, I'm not going to give the story away just in case there's somebody who's going to watch the videotape of this, but that's as far as I'll go.
No spoilers. Hmm.
But I love this. You know, my mother was very much a kind of a Gertie McDowell type and was very much into fashion. And since she didn't have any daughters, she would prattle this type of stuff to me, who of course could, you know, I mean, I listened because she was my mother. But, you know, so I got a lot of knowledge from her just because she didn't have a daughter to tell these things to. And so, and I, you know, at the time I was very bored. Now I'm kind of glad that I got all that experience and that sort of thing and kind of had an idea of how these things worked.
Yeah.
Emily, any comments today? I'm really glad you came today.
Sorry?
I said, I'm really glad you came today. It's always a pleasure to hear you read.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a lovely compliment.
Well, it's almost like, and forgive me if I've asked you before, but did you have any theater experience in your?
Just amateur acting, but after I was injured about 20 years ago, I couldn't do very much, so I started narrating audiobooks for the National Council for the Blind. Now you can get audiobooks everywhere, but that was just on a volunteer basis, and I just absolutely loved it. Just settled in there and read away, you know.
Okay. Well, you have an excellent reading voice, and you're very good.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I always thought you did acting as well. This is beautiful.
I think everybody acts a bit in their own way, don't they? In their own everyday.
Yeah. Well, my mother was in community theater, and she kind of dragged me into it, and so I had a little bit of experience. And then when I was in high school, actually, the biggest honor I ever got in high school was being nominated. The stage crew was made up of the Bad Boys, and the teacher who managed the stage crew would let them select who they wanted to bring in new, and I and a friend were selected, and it's still to this day I consider this one of the greatest honors I ever had. So I was involved in stage crew for 3 or 4 years, and I did some very minor acting, and I think that's why I like Zoom reading.
Kind of going into background, I actually did two professional jobs for RTE. I made a documentary, a radio one. And I mean, it was the triumph of naivety over experience. I threw myself in without knowing how much work was involved. And I mean, it was just brilliant. So it's great fun with that. And I narrated another one. They asked me back, but they never asked me back again. I didn't get on with that producer. He was horrible. So I kind of let him away with being he didn't even have the pronunciations of people's names right that were in the documentary. I thought, you can't let this go out, you know. But they don't like being criticized. So
not only that, they don't like, not only do they not like criticism, most don't like to be corrected even when they're obviously wrong.
Gosh, just tell me if I'm wrong, and I'm quite, cool, get on with it. It's all learning. But they never asked me back, put it that way.
Yeah, okay.
Their loss.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, can I tell you, I was on television when I was 10, Wanderly Wagon, only the Irish.
Excellent.
It was a new show, and I was a fairy at the Christmas tree forest. So, yeah.
Wanderly Wagon.
Just thought that would cheer you up.
Yeah. Bring back good memories.
Here falling.
Yep. Okay.
Wanderly Wagon was a children's program, Duncan.
Say that again.
Wanderly Wagon was a children's program on RTE. So we were all glued to it.
It was brand new. It hadn't been kind of done before. Actors playing with puppets and everything, So
Yeah. And Judge was the
we
dog.
only had one channel, so
Yeah.
it was really important.
Yeah.
Oh, we were deprived children.
Yeah, we can share memories because we only had one channel.
Yeah, well, that's great. I was actually at the age of 5 or 6. My only television stuff was at the age of, I believe it was 5 or 6. My mother took me to a department store in Dallas, Texas, and they were having the selection for the first president of the Webster Webfoot Club. And Webster Webfoot was this ventriloquist duck. It was a local children's show, and they were selecting the president based upon who lived the furthest away from Dallas, Texas. And I was raised on the island of Aruba off the coast of Venezuela. So, I won. So that meant that for 2 weeks, I would go down to the television studio for the recording of the Webster Webfoot Club. I was paid in boxes of chocolates. Every time I went on 2 weeks, they would give me a new box of chocolates, and that was my major experience with television.
That was a good one.
My crowning achievement, as it were, in multimedia.
And you're part of the McLuhan reading group as well. So what would Marshall McLuhan have said? All I know is the medium is the message. That you were on TV when you were young, getting paid in chocolate, in sweets.
Well, I think that McLuhan would have said that actually it changed my relationship to television. That before that particular point, television was totally magic for me. And when I had the experience of going there every day for 2 weeks, and I got to repeat this 2 years later, I learned what television looks like from the other side of the camera, and I learned how it's staged. And I was a mischievous child, and so I would, because I was the president, I got to sit next to Webster Webfoot, and I would tickle him. And apparently, that sort of laughter was very, very difficult. So I got to learn something about ventriloquism and its limits as well. So just that kind of stuff. And I've never been overawed by television since then. It's just it's just another daily event. Yeah, so. It's just like you, Art. I believe you work in the museum, right?
Oh yeah. Well, I work in an office in a gallery. So am I on?
Gallery. Okay. So
Yeah.
you would have
it's an art museum.
Okay.
But I work in an office, and so I think what you're talking about is the magic of it, and not being. I think for us who work there all the time, it's about keeping yourself inspired. And I'm sure it is for people who work in television and radio as well, because you have to remember what it meant for you at the beginning in some way and not be jaded by it. I mean, and that's what's so interesting about Joyce, is that you read it again and then you read it again, and there's something else. So for all of us, and like I wouldn't have, it's through reading it aloud and paying attention in another way. And I suppose in the same way with fine artworks, the more you learn, the more you get from it. I mean,
Yeah.
there is the aside from collectibles, as Bill would say, the difference is it's not the same type of commodity when you're reading books or literature, or it's because often when people go into museums now, the first thing they want to know is how much is it worth?
Yeah, right.
And so the difference between that and this is, I mean, you know, the copyright's gone on Joyce, so it's everybody's now.
Yeah.
You can use the words whatever way you want. You can interpret them whatever way you want, and you're not going to get into trouble with the estate. So there's something lovely about us being able to have that freedom. Because I don't know if prior to it becoming to it coming out of copyright, would we have been able to talk about it online in this way as a matter of interest and read it aloud?
Fair point.
Yeah, I know I got in trouble one time in the Dante group where the Facebook decided that I was somehow infringing upon copyright. And they wouldn't allow me to put up a certain video. So, but you know, going back to Joyce, I mean, Joyce, a lot of Joyce's charm is by doing that thing of going behind the scenes. You know, a lot of the value of what he's doing, of course, the writing of it is very important, but he goes behind the scene and it's kind of shares all these behind the scenes secrets with us. So it works extremely well with Joyce. The other thing in regard to the copyright, you know, I have for $1.99, I have almost every word James Joyce ever wrote. I have all of the poems. I have all of the social and political writings. I have all of the books. I have the play, and I have all of his letters.
And where did you get that?
From Amazon.
Holy God.
It's an Amazon Kindle thing, you know, and it is, I use it all the time. Because of course, if I want to look up, you know, something in a letter, if I know the key words, I can look it up. If I want to know something, you know, there's some mention somewhere. It's really marvelous. And once again, none of it is copyrighted, so I can share it with whomever in print form. So, yep. Alrighty.
Excellent.
And you're talking about one program on a channel, or you know, information when I was young was the encyclopedias. I don't know if you all had encyclopedias. And even if you were totally bored, you'd flick through an encyclopedia. And now what everybody needs is a computer, and it's like everything.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's probably time for us all to go, is it?
I think you're right.
Yes.
I think you're right.
It was a
Arlo.
lovely
you.
day. Thank you all.
It
Thank you,
was-
Duncan. See
Thank
you
you all
next
very
week.
much.
Well,
Thank you.
all
Thank you,
very, very
Duncan. Bye, Anne. Bye,
Thank you,
Emily. Bye,
Gavin.
Lou. Night, night.